Hi, I am Kate. My pronouns are she and her. And before I start, I just want to say thank you. And I'm going to cry, and I'm so sorry, but thank you for listening and being a safe space. Sorry. I haven't had a safe space to be myself growing up. And so I'm really, 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 really grateful for this opportunity. Wow, didn't expect that. Ooh,
I told
you. Okay. This is all your fault, Carl.
Roll with it.
All right.
Look out, there's a sea of love.
I chose the reading by Takahashi that Carl just read because it really does encapsulate how I feel about my spiritual path. It's a twisty-turny thing. Walk the maze within your heart. Guide your steps into its questioning curves. I'm still in that maze, peeking through the hedges, looking to see what's on the other side. I have come to think that there may never be an exit in this maze. Just another path to go down that's really just going to lead me to more questions than answers. But honestly, I'm really okay with that. But for a long time, I was really not okay with not knowing. When people ask what you believe, I think that they want a label. They want to hear, oh, I'm a Christian, I'm a Buddhist, I'm a pagan, I'm an atheist. So if you really want a label, I would label myself a spiritual mystic. I don't claim any one religion. I don't claim any one creed. I believe that the kaleidoscope of world religions all have something to teach me. I learned to meditate and value the present moment from the Buddhists. I learned about sacrificial love and loving your neighbor from the Bible. I learned about our interconnectedness and our interdependence with the planet and each other from my pagan friends and from science. And I have so much more to learn. To me, there is not enough time in the day to explore the spiritual. I came from a very strict, and very, very far left. Well, no, whatever conservative is. Right, thank you. I'm far left. Okay, the opposite of me. Anyways, I came from a very strict evangelical Christian home. You get the idea. My mom was a Sunday school teacher. My dad was an elder who eventually became a pastor. We were at church every time the door was open, like every time. Freedom of theological thought, your own opinions, the value of other religions, that was highly frowned upon. Faith was extremely prescribed. You had to agree with their statement of faith and profess it, or you just were not one of them. You were a misguided sinner doomed to hell. As a kid, I just did what I was told, but as I grew older, I had a lot of questions which were also frowned upon. As an adult, though, I took a long quest through all the varied Christian denominations, until at some point in my 30s, I had just had enough. I had tried Lutheran, I tried Methodist, I tried Anglican, I tried Wesleyan, I tried non-denominational churches, emergent churches, and even the Episcopalians. Even the more liberal denominations, I just didn't quite feel at home with. They all had lovely people. I mean, really kind, good people. They did amazing work for their community, and they loved their God. But for me, I just really never felt at peace for very long or at home. I really thought there was more to God than what they were selling, so I just stopped going. I was tired of trying to squeeze this round peg into a square hole. And after years of conditioning that Christianity was the only way, I walked away. And for a moment, it was fantastic. I felt so free. And then reality set in, and I was really lost and really scared. What if I was wrong and I was going to go to hell? I had no idea what to believe without the scripted theology of my youth. With no religious credos to hold me up, it was honestly really stressful and a really dark time for me. And I had to start from scratch. What do I actually believe? Me. That was a foreign concept because, original thought was frowned upon. I had to form my own beliefs. And so I just began with what I knew, which was I believed in the divine. So I started looking for them in other places than the church. I found them in long walks in the woods. I found them on the yoga mat. I found them in meditation. I found them in biology. I found them when my spouse would forgive me. I found them in the love of my grandparents. I found them in a pollinator collecting nectar. Basically, everywhere I looked, it wasn't hard for me to see a spark of the divine. So I was finding the divine everywhere, but I really needed a spiritual practice that was tangible. So I devoured mindfulness practices, and they healed me from the religious dogma that had quite frankly traumatized me as a child and an adult. I found healing by creating my own altar in my home. There, I could practice spirituality on my timeline. My altar is an accessible place that I can say prayers and offer thanksgiving to both masculine and feminine and non-binary representations of the divine. I can be creative with the worship and make it very personal instead of very prescribed. I also took up the practice of tarot and found it to be an amazing way to communicate with the divine and a faithful guide to build deeper self-awareness. And though I loved my solitary practice, I still wanted a community to be a part of. And that's what led me here. I was told as a kid that the Unitarian Universalists were evil and they were going to hell. But here at this place, I felt free. I felt worthy, and I felt accepted. And if that is not divine, I do not know what is. And if that is not good, I do not know what is. And it seems to me that people are forced to come to terms with their beliefs about spirituality because of their own mortality. If you ask me, where do we go when we die? My response is going to be, well, how the heck should I know? How did any of us know? I mean, I have thoughts about the afterlife, but they're just theories. I'm not counting on heaven. I don't believe in hell. I hope at the very least I am given a green burial and composted and scattered on a protected prairie, and I can become a wildflower that gives life to another. You heard that, right? Okay, good. Write it down. My soul may wander around. I may reincarnate. I may have already lived multiple lives. I kind of think I have. I may meet the divine in a heavenly realm, or I may just cease to exist. And I feel that all these things are possible when I draw my last breath. And each one is just as reasonable to believe as the other. But for me, I think spirituality should be more concerned with life, not what happens after I die. What am I doing now that is good and holy and sacred? That's what I believe is important to discover in this spiritual maze I am in. I believe no one has a monopoly on the truth. No one really knows what God, spirit, or source is or is not. How can we? I mean, maybe the divine is simply an archetype, a projection, a need. Honestly, it doesn't matter to me. I don't need to prove anything. I don't have to have the one true, irrefutable way, because I love wandering the maze. I love being open and willing to discover how the divine will next reveal themselves to me. I find it liberating, and I find it much more interesting. And Because I feel the divine is a reality. I think they're way more creative and glorious than my tiny little human mind can even comprehend. So I refuse to put them in a tiny box of limitations and credos. I take each day, or at least I try to take each day, mindfully, looking for magic in the mundane, looking for glimpses of the divine. These glimpses give me hope to continue on in my not knowing. For a time, peace would not find me with so many unanswered questions, but the beauty I see around me, and the way the light hits the fall foliage, the way the birds know when and how to migrate, and the way this community pulls together and lifts one another up are some of the many, many ways my fear of the unknown and the wandering of the maze has led to peace. Namaste.
Morning, everybody. My name's Craig, and just want to take a few minutes to share some thoughts on the theme of our service today of This I Believe. Having just been through the Building Your Own Theology classes Carl was talking about, I've thought a lot about the statement of This I Believe. But sometimes I feel that statement still needs to end with a question mark rather than a period that's followed by some confident statement about the truths I hold dear. It's been a challenge to reconcile the tradition I grew up in, a Christian one, and more specifically, a United Methodist one, with questions I have about what the truth really is. I grew up in the South, in a small town, and while the particular Methodist church of my youth and my family was, a fairly open and tolerant place, the larger religious community I grew up in was not. These different influences from the church I grew up in to those of that larger religious community competed for influence in my life. This caused matters of faith and religious exploration to be a huge part of my life in my formative years, to shape me in countless ways and to tap into a spiritual yearning that I've always had. Having this as a backdrop of my religious life, I've discovered a conflict within myself between trying to understand what the truth is and my own identity. I feel like the truth, if it can be argued that it exists, is actually not one defined thing. In fact, my feeling is that to the extent that God is real, wouldn't God be big enough to reveal God's self in many different ways? I find a lot of beauty in that, actually. But I also still hold the tradition I grew up in, and particularly my roots in the United Methodist Church, as part of who I am, and I don't want to let go of that. This has caused me to conclude that a lot of what one believes maybe is not so much what one actually believes is truth or non-truth, but rather is significantly influenced by identity. I did a study abroad program while I was in college in Northern Ireland to learn about what was known as the Troubles. And that experience taught me that while the situation there on the surface was about religion, that was really a way to describe much deeper issues of conflict, colonization, oppression, acknowledgement, recognition, and coexistence that the people there were fighting with each other over. It wasn't so much about belief per se as it was about how one identified oneself. I may not be trying to navigate life in the midst of a conflict like that, but I can relate to the idea about how religious identity can give direction to one's place in the world. At the end of the day, perhaps I'm uncertain about what I believe exactly, but I'm getting more comfortable with the idea of uncertainty. Besides, I'm not sure if what I believe is really all that important. What difference does that make in the world? It's seeming more and more to me that what really matters are the actions I take in life, and that should be my personal theology. These actions are influenced by the tradition I grew up in, which at its best has taught me that there's a power in love, manifested as selflessness, empathy, humility, and kindness. It's hard to explain in an objective or scientific sense, but perhaps that's where the Spirit resides, in the actual expression of those concepts, and living them out in real life. My actions are also influenced by the knowledge that there's, as Kate exactly said, there's no monopoly on the truth. Rather, the range of beliefs, faith practices, and non-belief that we see in the world, including in this congregation, brings so much richness to life that confirms the value of everyone. And that's why I think that first Unitarian Universalist principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person is so important and something that I just so strongly agree with. If someone were to ask me today if I'm a Christian, I'm not sure honestly how I would respond. The tradition of growing up in that faith, and particularly in the United Methodist Church, is still a part of who I am. And I'm not comfortable with the idea that there's not a God. If God exists, what it is truly is a mystery to me. If it exists, maybe it's an energy or a force that's really hard to understand. And if it exists, does it actually guide us? I don't really have an answer for that. But if there's something there, perhaps it's the incomprehensible thing that binds the universe together in a larger sense, but also binds us to each other. I think these questions are hard to answer, and I don't have any good answers. But maybe this presents too much of a focus on belief when what really matters more is what we do. As I get older, what seems to be the most important thing is to strive to build peace in this world that is reflective of a selfless, empathetic, humble, and kind love. It seems to be harder and harder to do that in our society today. Sometimes it can be so hard that people might ask, what is the point? What I know is that regardless of what I believe is true, what I believe is untrue, or what I'm uncertain about, building that peaceful world and doing the best we can to demonstrate a selfless kind of love helps us leave the world better than we found it and allows each of us to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Louise. I didn't know what I believed, and now I know that I believe in the beauty and validity of the 7 principles of the UU Church, and more than that. It's been a long journey, and I want to share it with you. Way back in July, I signed up for the UU class about building your own theology. I thought that would be a great idea because I really wasn't able to tell anybody what I believed in. So I was looking for help and clarity. Unfortunately, I missed the final meeting of that class because I was busy celebrating my birthday. And I did not put together my thoughts as to what I believed right now. Nor did I hear the discussion at that last gathering. So all of that makes this experience today rather scary for me. In his book, Religions, Values, and Peak Experiences, Abraham Maslow coined the term peak experiences to indicate that religious experiences are accessible to all persons, be they identified with a traditional religion, a theology, or neither of those things. He points to the ecstatic experience as being religious, a time when we celebrate being part of something greater than we are, be it the cosmos, beauty, or a cause. And then he explains that plateau and valley experiences are also religious. Plateau experiences are not marked by the intensity of the ecstatic experience. Rather, they are characterized by a kind of serendipity, an oceanic feeling, a total sense of well-being. He explained that a plateau experience is doubtlessly one that has been most sustaining for many of us. The glimpse of a sleeping child, so serene and peaceful now, who was our nemesis only an hour before, or the restful pause after a meaningful effort, or the satisfaction that breaks through routine between two people deeply in love. Or it could be the joy of pure solitude when there is nothing to distract. Those ideas really spoke to me. When I joined this church, I experienced an ecstatic religious experience. I had become part of something greater than I knew. It was shocking to me. That day was so emotional that I left the church immediately upon the end of the service and was not able to speak with anyone for the rest of that day. Until that day, all of my experiences with religion had not worked for me. I always felt like I didn't belong because I never believed what was required. My choices were limited. I could pretend and then belong. And then that made me part of a religious group in which I had to lie to be accepted. I could speak up and ask questions, which didn't work out so well, especially when in instruction to join the Catholic Church. This place and you people are a treasure, which I have finally found. It was a conversation I overheard between my son, Chris, who was 19 at the time. He was talking to my mother, and that conversation made me realize that my mother was racist, and I had grown up in a racist community. I was in college before I ever met a person of color. I was pretty clueless. While I was teaching in high school, I still remember how proud our principal was. And he related that of the 900 students in our school, we didn't have one student who took drugs, and certainly we didn't have any gay students. It was my son, Eric, who introduced me to the first gay person I was to meet when he was in college. Again, I was pretty clueless. And when my son, Eric, was 48 years old, he told me he was transgender, and he was transitioning at that time. I now have a 52-year-old daughter named Vivian. When I consider my lifetime, I can see that experiences of all kinds resulted in the evolution of my beliefs. As a child, I, like Craig, loved to go to the Methodist Church. Why did I go to a Methodist church? Because it was the only church within 10 miles of home. I didn't believe all of the things that they believed, but I didn't tell anybody because I felt they knew something that I didn't know, and I was ashamed that I didn't get it. A few years later, I started to wonder why my father went to a Missouri Synod Lutheran church by himself. It was curious to me that my mom and dad could not attend the same church. How could it be that they each thought they were right? When in high school, our youth group at the Methodist Church took an exotic and highly anticipated field trip to the closest Catholic church. which was 20 miles away. And they too thought they were right. And then I married a Catholic. Without persistence from my uncle, my father would not have attended that ceremony because I was marrying a Catholic. After trying a variety of churches in an effort to find one we could both accept, I decided to try the Catholic Church. After 2 sessions of instruction, the local priest informed me that because of my questioning, I could not be considered for membership. I pretty much gave up, although I did insist that my children go through confirmation classes at the Methodist Church, and then they would decide what to do with it. One of them joined the church, and one didn't. I had given up on the idea of church until now. After my husband died, many things changed for me. The village of Irma, which I'm sure you're all aware of, it was no longer comfortable for me. The house and grounds didn't seem right. I took some time to consider what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. I was told I probably had 20 years to plan for, and I wanted them to be meaningful, and I wanted them to be fun. I became familiar with the UU Church and the city of Eau Claire, which just happens to be between my 2 children. The thoughts of what happens here is still overwhelming to me. But I now believe that for me, God is not a noun, but a verb, as the feminist Mary Daly suggests. The word God may not refer to any being which is up there or out there or even in here, but to a divine process of which we are a part. It may be that we experience the divine in communal power that is created out of the gathering of people in worship or in pursuit of a noble cause. As a result of my experience teaching, I believe in the worth and potential of each individual, and in doing what I can to facilitate each individual's belief in themselves. The act of teaching is, to me, a peak experience. And we are all teachers, all of our lives. My beliefs, as are Kate's and Greg's, still evolving, and somewhat of a mystery to me. But I must say that the decisions that I have made for myself as to how I want to live revolve around the 7 UU principles. I do hope that someday I will get it all together, but in the meantime, I'm feeling good about where I am now in the evolution of my beliefs. I've got 18 years left, hypothetically. And I'm working to make them thoughtful, useful, and rewarding. And I will keep listening to my son and my daughter.